Good morning, and welcome to the Indigenous Language Institute's Web Symposium series. I'm Mara Dustudi, ILI board member and your moderator for today. Today's presentation, featuring Dr. Gregory Cajete, will last approximately 1 hour. After the presentation, we will take a 10-minute break before starting the Q&A session. During the break, keep this window open. Do not leave the webinar. You cannot be readmitted. To submit a question, use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Questions will be answered during the Q&A session after the break. And now, may I present Dr. Gregory Cajete.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you're having a pleasant day, or at least the beginning of a pleasant day. My name is Gregory Cajete. I am from Santa Clara Pueblo, New Mexico, which is one of 6 Tewa-speaking pueblos north of the capital of New Mexico, which is Santa Fe. And it's really my pleasure to have this opportunity to present some thoughts and perspectives to you related to native language learning. A little bit of my background. I am from, as I said, Santa Clara Pueblo. I've been an educator for really about 40, I'm going to say 48 years, which is quite some time in terms of active teaching, but I still continue to teach in a variety of different capacities, including this one, which is the new way of getting your thoughts out, which is the Zoom, or so I call myself a boomer Zoomer in that regard. In any case, I started my work at the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, where I was hired as the science teacher. My background actually begins with having a degree in field biology, field studies in biology, which really then allowed me to become a teacher of science. So I started at the Institute of American Indian Arts, which used to have a high school program. And my role there was to actually create curriculum that would engage Native students using, of course, concepts of science, their own cultural histories of science, and also incorporating the arts into the presentation of science. And so my work has primarily been around curriculum design and development and implementation related to science and science-related fields. So I stayed at the Institute of American Indian Arts for 21 years. I was dean of the Center for Research and Cultural Exchange. And then I moved on to the University of New Mexico, where I was the Indian education specialist, as well as later, a few years later, became the director of Native American Studies for the university. So I've had a lot of experiences worldwide, primarily in the area of Indigenous education and Native science. And of course, language has always been a part of that repertoire, if you will, of experiences. So I retired in 2020 from my institutional role as Director of Native American Studies. And I currently simply work in doing presentations and exploring different aspects of Native education. So hopefully that'll give you some insights into the work that I've done. Language, again, has always been a part of the work in Indigenous education. Language revitalization certainly is important to all aspects of contemporary Native education. But again, as I'm sure all of you know in the audience, there are many ways to approach language learning and revitalization, and I think Native peoples have explored most of those avenues. And what I want to do in today's presentation is introduce you to a curriculum model. It's called the Zais model for curriculum design and research. It's the model that I used at the Institute of American Indian Arts in my early years, spanning from my work there in 1974 all the way through my leaving the Institute in 1995. But nonetheless, working and creating curriculum that engages Native students, not only in the learning of science, but actually in the learning of any subject area. And it's been a useful tool for myself. It is a tool that can be very complicated in the sense that it is a research based curriculum design tool. In its purpose, really, in the research world, is actually to create theory. So curriculum research, that leads to the creation of a theory or how things work, and some explanations of why it works that way. We won't go into the Zais model that deeply in this session because of time, but just wanted to let you know that it's a model that has become very useful to me, but I've adapted it in many different kinds of ways to the needs of Native education, Native educators, and certainly now in terms of Native people as they explore the different ways to teach language in their particular context. So I hope this information and perspective is useful to you. And I will get right into it right now, just to start this process and of exploration. So I'm going to go ahead and share my model. Let's see. Okay, hopefully you can see the screen. As I'm saying there, the Zais model for language curriculum research and design is an excellent tool for the development of the culturally responsive curriculum. And again, the adaptation to language use, and also to working with Native populations in the classroom is my adaptation. Again, as I said, the model itself is very flexible in terms of how you can approach using curriculum design as a way to organize, plan, and implement any kind of curriculum. But again, we'll focus on language curriculum in a Native context. So the Zais model for design is a culturally responsive curriculum tool. I do make a distinction between culturally responsive and culturally based. So in education, the culturally responsive curriculum includes elements of culture and language and such in the curriculum, but it's usually what we call a standard curriculum. It's for teaching, let's say, science, or teaching language arts, or teaching a variety of different kinds of disciplines. So it's a very much a school-based kind of design. There's another category of curriculum that is called culturally based, that is being used by many schools, tribally operated schools, as we're beginning to take over many of our schools in many of our communities. The schools are using what is called a culture base, and that is where the culture itself becomes the focus of a lot of the teaching and learning And of course, when you do that, the language is also prioritized, as a part of the curriculum design and implementation process. But essentially, the Zais model is composed of 4 pairs of components and foundations, which are interrelated. It allows for a comprehensive understanding and application of curriculum design in a educational program or a school. So it just depends on where you happen to be using the model, and in terms of how you actually use it and use it as a design model. So the Zais model is again a very comprehensive model, but I particularly focus on the part of the model which is entitled Epistemology. So if you can imagine 4 boxes on top of 4 boxes, 4 boxes on top of 4 boxes. So if you have access to a pencil and paper right now, just draw 4 boxes on top of 4 boxes, okay? And that's the structure of the model itself. On the bottom 4 boxes, those boxes are called foundations. And then on the top of the boxes, or those top 4 boxes, those are called components. So the first foundation box, the first box in foundation, is called epistemology, which is a big fancy word, comes from anthropology of education. But epistemology is simply how you come to know what you know, and the knowledge base that you're using. That's all that means. So as I'm saying there, epistemology is the guiding thought of a curriculum, especially a culturally based, culturally responsive curriculum. It describes how a culture views knowledge. It forms the philosophical foundation for how a teacher, a learner, and community may approach an educational process. So this is the culture component of a curriculum. And each of the boxes that are part of the Zais model require research. In other words, you have to, in a sense, research the knowledge bases of the culture or traditions that you're going to present in the curriculum. So that's why the epistemology base is really especially important in a language curriculum, because the language essentially is a representation of the thoughts and perspective, learnings, the understandings, the history of a culture. And so before you really begin in this curriculum model, you have to know something about that culture, about its history, about its its stories, its philosophies, its essentially traditions and way of life. Because native languages, are essentially conveyors of that epistemology, that knowledge, that perspective. And so ultimately the purpose of any language is really to form a foundation for the culture, the tradition, and the community work. And so that's why epistemology becomes very important. As I say there, it includes kinds of embedded knowledge, the wisdom, the symbols, the metaphors, the orientations, the relationships that are cultural in nature. And of course, language, art, story, ritual, dance, architecture, community, and technology are the ways that it is presented. So you need, of course, the language or a language essentially in a native culture presents these concepts, these ideas, these orientations of the culture. And so when we teach a language, it's not just a matter of teaching the language itself, but its ultimate purpose is really to restore some aspect of the culture, its stories, its traditions, et cetera, et cetera. So again, I have to also say that this box, the first box of the Zais model is something that you never stop researching. You're constantly researching it. You're constantly looking at ways to present these ideas that are in the form of story, dance, architecture, community, in the context of the language teaching and learning. And so, again, the epistemology is that very special place. And because I do culturally responsive, culturally based curriculum, this is always my starting point, having a sense of the cultural traditions, et cetera, et cetera. Now, this box sits on top or sits below the other box, which I'll show you in just a few minutes, called the aims, goals, and objectives. So every curriculum, has its aims, goals, and objectives. In other words, what do you want to accomplish with the curriculum that you're designing, the educational plan that you're designing? So every good curriculum has a firm sense of what is to be accomplished, through the curriculum itself. And those are usually the first things you see in most written curriculums is, its aims, goals, and objectives. Sometimes it's couched as the mission of the program or the mission or the vision of the program, but essentially it's your aim. What do you want to accomplish, through this particular use of language or creation of a language learning process? Okay, so that's epistemology, really very important. As I said, the first component that sits on top of the foundation box, so this is the component box, is those aims, goals, and objectives. What do you want to accomplish? And I'm just throwing certain perspectives in. This can change depending on your needs in the work that you want to do in the language learning process. For me, I want to integrate key cultural perspectives within the curriculum that I'm developing. I want to reinforce and support the strengths of students, their learning skills, and their talents. I want to validate and affirm and build upon the funds of knowledge that students bring with them, because all students bring to a learning process a fund of knowledge. They have experience, they have understandings, they have a certain orientation, and all of that comes with the student into the learning process. And I want to develop relevant ties to students, family, community, and tribe. So these are general aims, that I've sort of come up with, as I have developed these various kinds of culturally responsive, culturally based curriculum. And so the aims, goals, and objectives, is the box in which you research, in which you state, in which in some ways you articulate these aims. The goals are, specific things you're reaching for, and the objectives, are how you're reaching those goals. So you can break this box down into very much detail. But I just literally my curriculum design, I start with the aim or the vision that I want to establish. I want to teach for in the curriculum. Okay, so again, this can be varied. It can be detailed in different ways, but these are just an example that I'm giving you of how I've used that. So you have the first box is aims, goals, and objectives, and that's in the component section. And then the box below that is the epistemology. I begin with the epistemology because I have to have a sense of what I'm going to teach about regarding and using the language itself. Okay. And then I also have to have as in mind what I want to accomplish with the whole curriculum, with the whole language intervention project that I'm doing. The aims can continue to include things like helping a sense of affective situatedness of what is being learned in the lives and culture of the students. And that's just a fancy education way, academic way of saying that whatever you're teaching with regard to the language has to have meaning, to the students. It has to have cultural meaning, or it has to have personal meaning. And we know that is what in education we call the affective dimension. And that is very, very important to engage early on, right at the very start of a curriculum, engaging students, based on what the language, what the culture means, and why it's meaningful for the student to be learning it. Okay, so this meaning business is very important. It's very psychological in many ways. Many participants in a language program, they come into that program for their own reasons. It may be that they didn't learn the language or have the opportunity to learn the language. They were not exposed to the language when they were growing up. In earlier days, of our boarding schools, they were restricted from learning the language, or from speaking the language. All of those are part of the histories of, language and language loss, which still continues today. We also have issues, that deal with, families having to move away from the community to work, or displaced individuals from the community where they've never had the opportunity to learn the language. So there are multiple reasons, that people bring to the process of learning the language, and so you have to be aware of those multiple reasons and the meaning behind that. But this idea of situatedness or affective situatedness is considering that is really about empowering the students to take ownership for their education. In other words, it's really instilling in them that the language is important, and that through learning the language, they empower themselves in that process. I use a metaphor called finding face, finding heart, and finding foundation, through which they are learning. And so this is an indigenous metaphor. And it comes from Aztec philosophy. When I was doing the research, for developing the curriculum I did at the Institute of American Indian Arts, I was looking for a philosophical perspective that I could include in my writing about the curriculum. And in those days, I'm talking about 1970s, there was very, very little material on native traditional forms of education, and they were not the scholars that we have today writing about native education. So I had to look beyond, and find find research material that I could use in my curriculum at that time, 1974. So I found this very obscure book called Aztec Thought and Culture, and it's written by a Nahuatl Indian person who had come from Mexico, immigrated from Mexico, whose name was Miguel Leon Portillo. And he taught at the University of Texas, Austin in the 1960s. So he had written a book about his people, the Nahuatl people of Mexico. And it was really quite good, and really quite, is one of the first native philosophy books that was comprehensively researched and presented. Um, and so I used a lot of his material. And so one of the metaphors that he used in the in this book, Aztec Thought and Culture, was a scene. So he was translating some of the old texts of the Aztecs from the Nahuatl Indian language, and then it had been translated into Spanish, and then he was translating the Spanish and the Nahuatl into English. Okay, so he was going through a translation process. And so he found a piece in this where there was a poem, and the poem was speaking to the question, what is it to be a person of knowledge? What is it to be a person of knowledge? And so he presents a scene where, of course, the Aztecs had these colleges. They actually had colleges. And these colleges were two types of colleges. One college was essentially a military school. It was a college of warriors. And then the other college was what we would call the arts and sciences today. It was a college where the scholars, the philosophers, the poets, went to. And so I would imagine this was happening in a college where the artists and the poets and philosophers were gathered. And so the professor, they actually had equivalents of what we are today, what we call today professors. They would call it Tzalitzamin. And so this professor comes before this group of students in this college and presents the question, asks the students, what is it to be a person of knowledge? This and in those days, very much like the Maoris and the Hawaiians, the teacher would chant, so the discourse or the kinds of things that were done within these colleges were put into poetic verses, poetic forms, and they were actually chanted, which is a very ancient way of doing education. Many cultures use that. So he chanted this question, to his students, what is it to be a person of knowledge? The students go away for a while and they reflect on that question. And then they come back with a response in a chanted form, a response to that question. So they chant back to the professor. To be a person of knowledge, one must first find one's face. Find one's face. And so in today's world, finding face is about identity. You have to have a sense of who you are, where you come from, and your place in the world. So to be a person of knowledge, one must first find one's face. Then one must find one's heart, which is that passion, that desire that drives us to do what we do, to be an artist, to be a teacher, to be a leader, all of those kinds of things, what we call desire, passion, for what we're learning or what we want to learn. So finding heart. And then finding a foundation was about finding a set of skills, a philosophy, a concept upon which you would reflect your heart and your face. Okay, so it's about skill, it's about profession, it's about being one of the 10,000 kinds of things that we can do. So finding face, finding heart, finding foundation. And they said it doesn't stop there. It's in a context of respect, responsibility, resonance, and relationship. First, yourself with yourself with your family, yourself with your people, yourself with the place in which you live, and finally yourself with the whole cosmos, the whole world. And so this finding process, you see, was a part of indigenous ways of knowing, indigenous ways of thinking. And I use that metaphor primarily because in a lot of ways, it's very similar. A lot of different ways of languaging that and storing that and our native traditions, our native tribes. But it's basically the same ideas, that come forward in terms of how and why language is important in the context of native communities and native tribes. Okay, so that finding face, finding heart, finding foundation was a metaphor that I used, early on to begin to sort of conceptualize what was that indigenous perspective that I was trying to get at in the teaching of language, or in this case, at the Institute of American Indian Arts, in the teaching of science to Native students, Native high school students primarily. So that finding face, finding heart, finding foundation, is a guiding metaphor. There are many guiding metaphors. There are many ways of saying that in each tribe. And so part of that research process in a tribal setting is to maybe find those kinds of stories or those kinds of metaphors in the language itself that are used to describe the reason or the meaning of learning the language itself. So this was one that I used, and have been using ever since. So finding face, finding heart, finding foundation in relationship to respect, responsibility, and relationship. And resonance means that that you have an embodied understanding of this process. And if you can look at it in terms of concentric rings, first your family, first yourself first, and then your family, then your tribe, and then the place in which you live, and then the whole cosmos. And the one last thing I'll say is that the metaphor ends with all of this process of finding is towards becoming a complete person, complete man or complete woman. And that is a part of Indigenous education as well, in the sense that becoming a whole person was one of the reasons for this process of learning and understanding and developing insight as you grow and as you learn and as you age, within the context of a tribe or society. So those are the things that impelled essentially the traditional form of and the reason for learning language in a indigenous setting. So again, the other purpose of those aims, goals, and objective is to address teaching and planning in relevant ways. And so, as I say, this is really important. One more note here before I move on. In most native languages, the word for the people themselves is people. We are people. We are people. And so the name that Native people give themselves as a community, as a group of people, means people. So it's towards that idea of becoming a full human being, and so those are parts of the intricacies, if you will, of Native epistemology. The next foundation, that next box under in the Zais rubric, is entitled Society and Culture. And in this box, you ask the question, what are the social factors that motivate you, to teach, that you need to be aware of, as you teach and as you create this curriculum? So in other words, who is your audience? It's the audience is the tribe, the community, the individuals, that participate in the program. What are the social and cultural factors that affect the students, the teachers, the community, and the school or tribe in which the curriculum will be administered? So being aware of, and actually in some cases having to research these social and cultural factors, because they impact what you do and how you do it, how you create your curriculum. Of course, the teaching of a language in a community is based on native, societal, and communal needs, expectations, and we all have our own contemporary, I want to emphasize contemporary native culture. And all of these are social factors that affect your teaching of a language. Above that, well, let me go back to that. And so today, one of the reasons why language teaching is prioritized in Native education is because we know that it's an integral part of the finding face, the finding heart, the finding foundation in Native life and tradition historically, but also because learning or relearning a language adds to the resilience and also the strength of a community culture. And so these are social psychological factors that directly impact the learning of a language. Of course, it's going to differ from individual to individual, but in the big picture, these are the reasons why language is prioritized, and we have so many different variations of language learning going on in our Native communities. Here also, before I go on, I keep forgetting, we also have to be aware of why the language has been lost or is being lost. And that's because of economics, parents having to work outside of the community, different kinds of social factors, poverty, a variety of different issues that come up within the communities that are unique to those communities that cause this language loss to happen and to accelerate. So being aware of all of that is essential as an understanding. So the next box is called components, component 2, which is content. And this is actually what you're going to teach, what you want to teach. In my case, I look at the Native perspectives of language, family, and community, and teach about that. Language learning combined with Indigenous values and ethics. So a lot of those proverbs, those metaphors, that are part of the language, I really focus on them because they also impart a sense of the core values of a community, of a culture. Various Indigenous themes, that can be used, activities and forms of community knowledge. This is where knowing the community and knowing the things that work within the community in terms of the interests of people, the engagement of learners becomes a real important understanding. And then different kinds of ways to deliver that content, including art, science, just the multiple ways in which you can deliver that content. So in this section, I focus not so much on the specific things that I'm teaching, although that comes and is very important. I'm looking at the big picture context in which the themes that I come up with, that I'm going to teach about, using the language becomes an important, consideration in the curriculum. Again, most curriculums go directly to, okay, this is what we're going to teach. But you notice that in the Zais model, it asks you to do research on the epistemology, research on the social cultural factor. About, because that's important, relevant knowledge, and it's to really focus on that. So so that's the component. What do you want to teach? So in the Zais model, there's another box that talks about who is the learner. And I have to say that the learning or learner-centered curriculum is probably the best to use in a language program. And to answer that question, who is the learner? Who are you teaching? You have to take into consideration the various native cultural personality configurations. Each tribe has its unique way of being a member of that tribe, a culture within that tribe. The field sensitive learner means that we learn based on the inputs from our whole environment, our family, our community, the actual place in which the tribe is located, et cetera, et cetera. So all of those factors, that impact the learner are considered in this concept of the field sensitive learner. Also, the idea that native learners are generally group learners. They learn in groups as much as they learn at the individual level. Using different kinds of approaches to teaching, such as participation in activities, collaboration about the language, talking to each other about the language, experimental or experiential rather orientations, the experiences of learning, all of those kinds of things that we bring to learning become important considerations in creating a profile of who you're teaching, the learner. And then, of course, there's a lot of different kinds of what we call the affective learning methodologies, where the focus of the learning is creating meaning on the part of the learner for why they're learning what they're learning. And then if you're working with younger students, you also have to include the peer psychology, the influences that the others have on what the student wants to learn, how they want to learn it. Of course, this is going to be different, from let's say children to adolescents to teenagers, and then to adult learners. Okay, so every learning category is going to have its own unique characteristics that you have to be aware of in a curriculum. And this then leads, based on that understanding of the learner, this is where you create different kinds of learning activities. Now here, I've presented the different kinds of schools of learning, if you will, schools of learning psychology that we use in education. The one that's really developing and the newest one is what we call brain pattern methodologies. This is where you actually work with how the brain actually learns language, and you create learning activities around the way in which the brain learns and the way in which we as human beings learn. So the brain pattern methodologies can be many and varied, but it's based on brain research, based on many years, 2 decades or more now of scientists studying the brain and watching the brain in different kinds of learning activities. And I have to say that a lot of the traditional forms of teaching and learning actually coincide with what we're now learning about how the brain actually learns, how it processes information. And so this is a new kind of area that's evolving and developing in education, and it is now coming into native education as well. And of course, experiential learning is learning through experience, learning through doing, learning through being a part of community activities. So that's the community-based. Learning through using all of your senses, not just your ears and your eyes, but also your voice and your body. So that multi-sensory learning, which is embodied in things like dancing, or singing, And then you have high context learning, in which you're participating in a larger event, and there's a lot of different kinds of learning that are happening at the same time. For high context learning, I use as an example a powwow. You know, at a powwow, there are multiple kinds of things happening at once. Of course, the dances are the focus, the singing is the focus, but outside that, there's a whole context of things going on. There's people selling, there's people, bartering, there's people having conversations about things. So it's a high context event, and Native people had many kinds of high context events that learning happened at, and they can be considered. And the various kinds of projects that can be developed in which the language is being used specifically, again, is a tried and true area. And then the indigenous context for learning includes the various kinds of things that happen within a community where the language is important and where the language can be used, and is used in terms of that process of that context. And so, family events, community events, are all areas where this kind of learning happens. So the learning activity is tied to the learner, to knowledge and understanding of the learner. Okay, so learning and learning activities. And then finally, the final foundation in the Zais model is what one could call the learning theory. In other words, what ideas are you using to create this curriculum, and how are they being used in the creation of the curriculum? So, what I've presented to you is really some basic ideas about indigenous community learning. There's a lot of different creative learning theories that involve, how we learn when we're creating things like art, or when we're dancing, or when we're singing. So those are creative learning theories. The high context, low context is where we're looking at big picture things, where we're involved with big picture things, and the language is being used and being practiced in those big contexts of communication. Visual learning is learning by seeing. We have in language teaching total body response, where the teacher is going through an activity and describing that activity in the language, so that the person that is hearing the language is seeing the activity and is making the connection between the activity and what is being said in the language about the activity. So that's total body response. And Native people have been using this since time immemorial, so it is a way of language learning. And of course, among indigenous people, scholars like myself would do native language and also do native learning, and that's our focus of our research. There's an evolving theory of what works in indigenous education. And you just have to go to the literature on indigenous education, and you'll see the multiple researches that are happening among Native people and with Native scholars around this whole idea. Yesterday, I just finished a presentation to a group of Montessori teachers who are part of a Montessori language nest program here in New Mexico. And their focus is they're using Montessori methodology to teach their language. And so that's taking on some momentum among many Native communities, is their exploration of the use of Montessori's ideas and perspectives, because in many ways it parallels what we did traditionally in Native education. So that's why Montessori has become somewhat popular among some communities in terms of language teaching. Finally, in the Zais model, you have a component, and that theory piece relates to the evaluation. And evaluation should never be punitive. It should never be something that is looked upon as punishment or a test, but rather uh, how do you evaluate and learn from what you are doing? So that's my question. How do you evaluate and learn from what you're doing? And so if you're involved with a program that is doing indigenous teaching of language, eventually for funding purposes and also for reporting purposes, you're going to have to, create an evaluation process and also evaluation report. We do have a lot of we do have an indigenous evaluation model that has been used. It was initiated, the need was initiated by tribal colleges. AHEC, the American Indian Higher Education Consortium, engaged several of us, and myself included, to create an indigenous evaluation model for all kinds of Native programs that incorporated indigenous values into the whole process of evaluation. And that is available through AHEC, American Indian Higher Education Consortium. And there should be a listing of the indigenous evaluation model in their website. So if you're interested in how you actually do evaluation of especially language programs, cultural programs, this is a good resource for you. But other forms of evaluation include context-based learning. In other words, you're in the context of actually teaching a language in a community or in a setting, and you're just simply asking your question, what's working and what's not working, and you're asking yourself the question, why is it working or why is it not working? And so that's what's called context-based learning or evaluation. Of course, teacher assessment, teacher assessing what the students are learning based on some sort of rubric. The students are expressing their feelings about the learning. That's another kind of evaluation. Administration is asking the question, is it working? Should we continue to fund this program? So that's the administrative, very complex kind of evaluation process, very dependent on each program. The school and community is also kind of a evaluation partner, in which they look at what is happening in the community, in the students, as a result of some sort of language intervention. And then finally, you have the culturally based assessment. In other words, how are the students learning the important aspects of the culture through the teaching of the language itself, which is really the intent of the whole language process. So that is the Zais model. Okay, that's the Zais model, and it's a way of viewing and understanding what you're doing in a language program. It's adaptable both to the classroom and also to the community setting of language learning. And if you are developing a personal language curriculum for yourself and your family, it's also useful in that, and considering these are the important understandings and perspectives of teaching a language in a Native community. And I think at least in my experience over really the 48 years of my experience as a teacher, I've used the Zais model in so many different kinds of ways. School education models are very complex because you have state and federal agencies, the BIA, and also maybe the state, and at higher education, you have the curriculum committees that make creating curriculum very complex. So much so that people just go like this and say, oh, I don't want to do that, But actually, curriculum is the heart of any educational process, including language learning. So it's not just a matter of teaching the language, but really having understanding of how you're going about teaching the language, to plan it out, and to really put it into a comprehensive understanding for yourself, and in that way also have um, a way to present that to the students that you're working with. And it's a very powerful method in the sense that it allows you to really understand what you're doing, to make adjustments as you go along, and to actually, have a successful language program. Uh, so that's my presentation for this morning. I wanted to really, in some ways, it's very technical. So I have these really fancy PowerPoints, have all kinds of neat pictures, and but this one is kind of like the bare basics and the nitty gritty of it, in terms of how you create curriculum in an indigenous language setting, and so I wanted to share this with you this morning, just to give you that insight into the fact that the planned curriculum is much more effective. The more you plan the curriculum, the more effective you become as a language teacher, or your program as a language program becomes that much more strengthened, by its comprehensive planning process. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mara for some of the questions that I'm sure she has or that she's getting from the audience.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Cajete. So right now, I just want to remind everyone that you can submit your questions through the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Right now, we're going to take a 10-minute break so everybody can get a drink or go to the bathroom or whatever you need to do. But I want to remind you, don't leave the webinar. Keep this window open. Otherwise, you cannot be readmitted. We'll be back in 10 minutes, and then we'll start our Q&A. Thank you, and we'll see you in just a few minutes. Welcome back, everyone. I know we shorted you a minute or two, but we are back. So I will be asking Dr. Cajete the questions that you submitted through the Q&A button, and we have quite a few, which is nice. So our first question is from Robert Rhodes, and he asks, where are some places that native language instruction is being done appropriately? Some places we could use as models.
Well, one that comes to mind is the work I'm doing with the Keres Learning Center out of Cajete, New Mexico. There are actually a lot of different native programs in language that are being used by different tribes and communities. I know the Navajo Nation has several programs in play, as well as various communities here in the Southwest. But the one I'm working with, I can highly recommend it. It uses the Montessori methodology, but also incorporates indigenous thought, as I've presented to you. And you can just Google the Keres Learning Center. So it's Keres, Keres, Keres Learning Center, and that should bring up their website, and so it might be good to explore that. But again, I want to emphasize that there are many native programs that are out there that are doing this kind of work in a variety of ways. Some have websites, some are very community based, and are just doing work within that community. But again, as one example, I would say the Keres Learning Center.
Our next question is from Annie Major. What is the evaluation website? I missed it. I heard American and missed the rest. Sounds great evaluation tool we can look into.
Oh, absolutely. I really highly recommend it. It's called the American Indian Higher Education Consortium website. It's the acronym is AIHEC, 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 AIHEC. And in their website, you'll see Indigenous evaluation model. And it'll also give you information in terms of how to contact them directly, to ask them for that information. But it is for tribal use. It's, so you can access it. And it comes with a very comprehensive guide in terms of evaluating any kind of tribal program using indigenous core values as your focus. Yes.
Our next question is from Faith Russell. Can you share more of the origins and background of the Zais model? Is it native based? Is Zais a person?
Yes. Actually, he is a curriculum theorist. His name is Robert Zais, Z-A-I-S, Robert Zais, and he did his work in the 1970s. That also dates me, but in the 1970s, and his focus was creating what we call curriculum theory, and it is a Western approach. And it is actually very technical when you actually read the Zais model as he originally wrote it. It's a very technical, very academic model. But the way that I use it, I have adapted it to the use in Native education. And so the adaptation is mine, actually. I do have a book available that I'm hoping to make more widely available, in which it describes my work at the Institute of American Indian Arts using the model. It's called Igniting the Sparkle, an Indigenous Science Education Model. And this is totally about how to use the Zais model, how I use the Zais model when I was working at the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe. Again, it's under my name. The Igniting the Sparkle is its title. And I should say that this work is actually my doctoral dissertation, which I produced back in the 1980s. And it just describes, my process of designing the curriculum while I was working at the Institute of American Indian Arts. So again, if you want in-depth, really in-depth case study, this is the book. And I think Amazon carries it, but it's difficult to find, so you have to really look for it. I'm trying to reprint the copies, so maybe by the summer there'll be more copies available for consumption.
I love the title. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
And the next, there's a comment here, which I'll read to you, Dr. Cajete, but it's from Laura Collier. She says, it's not a question, but a thank you. Each time I need to dig deeper into my education, Cajete somehow pops into the scene and I get that missing factor. First with my science learning and now with language curriculum and understanding. It's a lovely comment.
Thank you. Thank you.
And the next question, though, is from Shannon Johnson. Hello, Dr. Cajete. Thank you for your presentation. Can you please provide some suggestions on meaningful field trips that will extend the Native students' learning of language and culture?
Well, I think the first category of field trip experiences should be something related to the tribal language that you're teaching. So again, depending on where you are or your situation, wherever there is a museum that has, let's say, artifacts of the tribe that you're of language of that language, that would be one of the first places. Any of the community events that are important to the tribe that students can attend are also really good places to do actual field trips. I know that some tribes are exploring what they call the virtual tour, where they're using Zoom and Zoom technologies to take students to different native communities where language is being used in particular kinds of ways. A little bit more technical, but again, I think it's something that engages a lot of the students, in language learning through the use of the computer-based technologies. I didn't talk very much about computer-based technologies in language. I know that they're being used and being used in some very creative ways as well. It's a whole genre of how you use what we call computer assisted language instruction materials, to teach about language, to learn language. And so this is going on in many universities where they're exploring different ways in which to teach native languages and using computer technologies to do so. But that would be a whole nother presentation. It's kind of complicated in that respect. But yeah, there is a lot of innovation happening in language learning. If I could pull up maybe real quickly one of the slides that I left undone here. Let's see. It's this one. I don't know if you can see that. I think you can see that, right? Can you see current trends in native language learning? So you can see that in terms of like everything else, language learning and language teaching, both in communities and also in the education setting, is evolving. And certainly, as I say here, the shift from revitalization towards enhancing and extending language use in whatever form necessary, including computer-assisted instruction, language reclamation. In other words, in many cases, because the language has come so close to being lost, really large effort into reconstituting the language from its original base, incorporating it into the written form, using language in different contexts, not only in the community or in the family, but also in the work setting, and then also immersion education in school, family, and community. So all of these are trends that are happening in language learning that are important to think about and consider depending on your situation and what you want to use your language teaching for. But I just wanted to share that because I didn't get a chance to finish that.
Okay, I think we have time for 2 more questions. This is from Laura Prosper. I'm not an educator, but I am a recent graduate from the UVIC Indigenous Language Revitalization Online Cohort Pilot Program, and my focus is in creating Mi'kmaq speakers in the home. I've been presenting this topic and has gained a lot of popularity. A lot of people in the homes do not have access to meaningful resources. And when we do have classes, the number of participants goes down over time. So will a plan like this be able to facilitate and accommodate learners in the home?
Yes, it does. In any language learning, language teaching process requires a plan. And so you just have to be very aware of your needs, for teaching language in a home setting, uh, and really understand what you want out of a language program to be able to use the Zais model. But yeah, definitely the same principles, ideas that I've just presented to you would work in a home setting, teaching in a home setting. Again, it's up to you to be creative, up to you to be, and how you want to adapt the model. But those principles of having a clear aim, using the culture as the base, having an understanding of the social factors, picking certain themes that have relevance, really focusing on the learners, really knowing who your audience is, and then creating different kinds of activities that really fit that home teaching setting, and then really fine tuning as you go along, which is really the purpose of any good evaluation. It's really meant to help you to fine tune uh, your process, because every curriculum, every teaching and learning situation is an evolving process. Okay, and so it's never set in stone. And the plan of the Zais model just simply helps you to understand where you are and what kinds of things are involved with the curriculum. So yes, the home school setting can actually be benefited from this model as well.
And I just want to say too that ILI definitely believes that um, uh, language instruction, however you do it in the home, uh, is not exclusive from school learning. I mean, both complement each other, and if you can have both, that's probably a very supportive ideal that'll get you more traction. Michelle Wellman Teeple asks, is Dr. Cajete's PowerPoint available anywhere?
Well, I think this program is being YouTubed, right? So
Yeah,
it is available in that context. Yeah.
it'll be available later in about a week or so. ILI will let you know.
Yes.
And one more question from Wanda Barker. Can this model, this Zais model, be used in bilingual curriculum?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. The Zais model is a model because it's a theoretical based model. It can be used for any language and any cultural group in any setting. It's just how you adapt the model for your use that makes the difference. So absolutely, yes, it can be used in a bilingual setting. As a matter of fact, much of our native language learning still continues in a bilingual mode. So that's an important consideration, and certainly it can be used, with English or any other language, as you're moving forward with these ideas in the Zais model. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Dr. Cajete, for this wonderful presentation today. And as just a reminder, this will be available as a recorded presentation on ILI's website in about a week or so. ILI will announce it, and I want to thank everyone who attended this wonderful presentation. It was so informative, and I hope you'll join us for the next Indigenous Language Institute Web Symposium. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you.